Pierce. I see. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:06. We can all hear each other now. All right. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone that the mission of the Swedish American, there's a time slip of about 4.5. I've been gone from there 4.5 years. The Rockford Public Schools is to collaboratively engage all students in a first-class education for a changing world. I could recite the Swedish American mission too, if you wanted me to, but okay. So before we go any further, I would like to thank Connor for all his work in helping us to get our equipment replaced and working well, and for helping with the broadcast of our board meetings on various systems like Zoom, YouTube, and Comcast Channel 20. We do not have any speakers for tonight, so I would ask, are there any board member comments at this time? Ms. Pearson.
Yes, thank you. I just want to take this time. First of all, I must say that it has been very concerning with the disconnect with our students in remote learning. So I'm looking forward to them returning back to school. And I have had an opportunity to reach out to some local pastors in my efforts to work on the gap between RPS 205 and the community and parents. So I want to specifically thank Pastor Kenneth Ward Copeland of New Zion of Rockford, Pastor Ronald Alexander of Hope Fellowship, Pastor Charles and Sheila Hill of the Park Church, which is in Subdistrict A, interim pastor Christopher Dixon and community member Royce Dixon for being willing to work with me as I come up with a plan for some parental and community engagement. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other board member comments? Okay, our next item is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Yes, and I'd like to turn my time over to Mrs. Detman to update the board on our performance framework that we've been developing. As we know, one of my CEO-centric targets for this year is to have this process completed by June 30th, and we want to continually update the board. This third meeting of the month is often a good time to do that. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Mrs. Detman.
The light is green now and not red, so new switch. Okay, tonight I'll just be updating you on where we are in our work streams, and we've added an additional work stream since the last time I provided an update. Perhaps. There we go. So our focus right now is listening to our system, and the way that we're doing that is through a method called human-centered design, which essentially means this. We're gathering groups of humans, groups of people in our system who are impacted by this work. We're asking them to share their stories, their reactions, etc. And then we're using that to determine what our next steps should be. In order to use human-centered design, the first thing you do is identify a challenge. Our challenge here, of course, is building this entire system-wide framework. You then identify the users and then build your plan around them. Our primary interest here is with our principals, and so we've started our principal focus groups. We've completed 2 meetings, and in those meetings we've done 2 things. First, we provided them a rather overwhelming introduction to the entire system-wide framework, all the components. And then we gave them a little bit of soak time and reaction time to just sit in that for a week or 2. Then we invited them back for a second meeting, and we call these second meetings storytelling because we're asking them to tell the stories of times when they've had a support or a service from the central office that has been a positive experience, and then a support or service that has not been a positive experience. We also ask them, what they wish the central office truly knew and understood about their school. And so we listen, for 60 to 90 minutes to the principals as they tell their stories. We script the conversation, and then we extract data from that. Our meeting 3 is set for April 13th, where they will be previewing the draft of what we've accomplished so far with our standards of practice. So they'll be actually able to respond to the product. So they have the introduction to overall what we're trying to accomplish. We've listened to some of their experiences, and then they'll provide us feedback on the actual product itself. Our second group is district administrators. This is what we're calling our rally cry team. It's a mighty, mighty group that has gone the distance over 26 meetings with cross-functional departments, and that does include REA leadership representation. While we've only had one REA voice at the table, we feel like it's been important to include them all along the journey. We have scheduled cross-functional department meetings every Friday. I just put them on everyone's calendar through September. There are more, though, departments than just those that are represented on the Rally Cry team, and so we're also doing some outreach to the cabinet members of all district departments. We've already completed our meeting with the CFO. We did that in early February. We are completing the rest of our meetings as we continue to finalize our drafts with the standards of practice. That's with communications, legal, technology, and operations. And those meetings are coming up this month. In those meetings, we'll be asking cabinet members to consider the standards of service that their departments will provide in order to support schools on the standards of practice. The fourth is the new work stream that's been added since the last time I've updated you, and these are our teacher focus groups. We've worked with the REA leadership to identify 18 teachers. So we've completed identifying the participants. They've been invited to the focus groups. They're now responding. And we'll be using the same format as the principal focus group, but with different targeted questions. So the first thing we'll do is introduce them to the entire system. Then we're going to listen to their stories. As practitioners, we'll divide them into groups, EC Elementary and Secondary, 9 and 9. We have 3 meetings scheduled. There's one error here. The first meeting is actually on April 7th. Second meeting, April 21st, and then the third meeting is May 1st. So by May 1st, we'll be able to show them a draft of our standards of practice and standards of service and get their reaction and feedback. We've scheduled 3 meetings with principals and 3 meetings with REA as a start. We anticipate that we will have more focus groups as we continue to get their reactions from the work. Part of human-centered design is creating positive goals and then drafting questions around those goals. So our goals for this work are to truly have open, honest dialogue about what is working and what's not working and what our end users really wish happened in terms of their systems and support from the central office. And so we are in the phase right now of doing research and then synthesis. When we do this, we collect data points. What that means is in our focus groups, I facilitate, and there are 2 note takers in the meeting. We script everyone's responses, removing names. Each of those responses becomes a data point. We populate them onto a sheet. From those, we do a sorting activity. We generate themes. From the themes, we generate key insights. And so you see data points into themes, into key insights. This happens outside of the meeting. So for every 60-minute meeting, we spend about 90 minutes to 2 hours generating themes and finding key insights. And so a good question to ask would be, so what have we heard for all this investment of time? Here's a few of the key insights that we've learned from our principal focus groups, and these I am going to just read. Just as the central office needs to clarify the standards for schools, schools need a chance to clarify their needed supports to those making decisions for the system. It's important to keep in mind how this feels to schools and district office staff alike through each step of the work. It absolutely cannot feel disconnected. If we are not clear on exactly what we are asking, we risk receiving information that doesn't truly send us down the correct path. It is necessary to not only be strategic in the supports that are offered to schools, but to ensure that they are not created in a vacuum and that there is an ongoing customer service focus in their delivery. That's what we heard from our principals. From our rally cry team, which is central office administrators, we heard, without more cohesion in our approach, we risk continuing in silos and making things feel narrowed but disconnected. In the absence of a common goal and understanding of how, we will continue to serve schools in silos and perpetuate a narrowed but disconnected approach. While no one definition is incorrect, clarity about the very purpose of the system appears to be necessary. There is emerging consensus that even though there is disconnect in the standards as is, one connection is a desire to do what's best for students. And in the absence of clearly connecting our work at a high level, we risk continuing to build a disconnected system. So we are hearing very, very clearly that even though we are moving this along, meeting after meeting, we're getting closer and closer and we're making more progress, there's still a risk of being narrow and being clear, but still having that disconnected, siloed feeling for schools. So that's something that is very much on our radar. That's what we're hearing, and that's the data we're extracting from these sessions. So just a quick look, you can see what principals are saying, what admin is saying, and this is really now where we narrow our focus for the next steps. In human-centered design, then we move to something called concepting after our research and synthesis. So these kind of overlap a little bit. In concepting, we ask the question, how might we? Okay, so if these are the things that we've heard, how might we revise our design, our is the rally cry team, to create the necessary clarity and cohesion, and how might we reinforce how to reach our goals? And that's where we are right now. So we've taken a 2-week hiatus from our rally cry team to give everyone a needed break, and also to step back a little bit, take a look at the data that we've gathered, and begin constructing a little more structure around those 2 questions. We've heard that we are getting clearer, but it still feels disconnected, and so that's our work. To address that, we have a 2-hour planning session coming up with the National Equity Project as well. We know that equity is a high priority for the board and for the district, and we want to make sure that as we build our system-wide framework, it feels very connected to our other priorities in the district. And you can even see some similarities of how we're listening to students and staff and how we're doing that listening here and building the framework. So that's our charge moving forward. When I come back in May for the next monthly update, you'll be able to have a peek at what we're doing to get at these two how might we's in the concepting phase. And I'll take any questions that you have.
Questions, comments? Mr. Connor?
Can you remind me, is there a, I'm going to ask at least one nerd question.
Sure.
You knew this one was coming. Is there a way that's standard for tracking all this? So if you're out in one of these groups in the schools or with the teachers and so forth, you're really looking at the same, like materials and goals and how it all relates. So is there a standard technique for documentation?
Yes.
and all the rest? Okay.
Yes.
And so that's part one, and then part B is, will we as board members have access to that as materials that we can kind of look at in the interim, or are we going to just get essentially a report and then a reference to it?
It's certainly available. It all exists. All of the data points are collected under themes and insights, and I'm happy to share or walk you through them.
Okay.
At any time.
What platform is this?
It's on a Google. It's just on a Google sheet.
Ah.
We are very manual. We are looking at each of the data points ourselves and generating themes
Yeah.
and key insights.
So my only comment about Google is that I just personally am not a fan. There's been connectivity issues for me. When you're outside the firewall, Google is not friendly. It's really good here and inside the network, but once you're outside that. So anyway, but I would be very curious to see this, especially if I might say, somebody who's been trained in like Agile and some of those techniques, I'm really curious as to how you tie the planning with the actual implementation as you go through. So I'll be very interested.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I have a very high-level question about answering the question, how will you know that all of your efforts are working and you're being successful?
Excellent question.
Okay.
For our planning or for the system-wide framework as a whole? Okay, good question. So we'll know that we are there in our planning through our focus groups when we start to see our key insights and our themes say more things like, this is getting clearer. I see where I fit in. When we see our standards of service really targeted toward the standards of practice. And when our schools start saying things like, now I know what my targets are and I know what my next steps will be. If we're not there and our key insights keep saying, but we're still confused, it feels disconnected, it feels, we're going to keep tracking that, and we need to start seeing a turn toward more clarity. And then for the system-wide framework as a whole, we're going to know that it is heading in the right direction as we start to gather our data in our baseline year for the standards of practice next year. We still hope to have a kind of a field test of one standard in as many schools as possible in May so that we get the feel of it. But then next year we'll be gathering that data.
If I can just add, I think what we really, when we know we've got this, is when the board, schools, and the district office all know where they fit on improving student achievement in the district.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what we're trying to build here, is a system that allows us to be accountable and supported on that journey. So if I'm working in a district department, if I'm a board member, if I'm a teacher, if I'm a school social worker, if I'm a principal, we all know where our job fits, and our efforts contribute to very clear measurements of success. So we've already got a scorecard that the board has seen an early draft of, but this is about the work you do to move the scorecard. And so it's really messy right now. And so I know it's kind of hard to follow, but you'll know we're there, because I think you asked the right question, Ken. You'll know we're there when you as a board member say, okay, I know what my job is to make sure schools are accountable, and how I as a board member can support schools. And I as a school principal know how the communications department is going to help me succeed in my job with their services. Or, we're really going to see how we all work together around what we know is the board's core focus, which is improving student achievement year after year after year.
How many principals were involved in the focus group?
We have 10 principals in the focus group, and we have 19 teachers.
Okay. So that's about 25% of the principals.
Yeah.
And, my only worry a little bit is that if you don't get all the principals on board, they're not going to get it, you know.
Yeah.
And certainly if you have principals that are in the focus groups, they're going to get it first probably, but then you've got to roll it out to the rest of the principals to get their buy-in.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a challenge that you'll have to figure out, I guess.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We are now on to internal and external stakeholder relations committee items. Any report, Mr. Siegel?
There is no official report other than to say tomorrow we will be having another listening session with staff of color at 2 o'clock, which I think is going to be very good. And also thanks to Mr. Earl Dotson Jr. and his communications team who put together a really beautiful looking slide deck. Next week at the Committee of the Whole meeting, there will be a presentation with visuals and documentation on what has been done within our committee that I think is going to make everything that we have done a lot more understandable than listening to me just ramble on for an hour. So, end of report.
You know, I just want to give a shout out to the communications team. I meant to do this during the comments and I forgot about it. The fact sheet question and answers about COVID and the next steps that are going to happen April 19th, fabulous job by the communication team in putting that together. I thought it was so slick that you could see the question, click on it, get the answer down deeper. You know, I thought the design was perfect and people could, the internal stakeholders could easily see the answers to their questions about what's going to happen. So great job by the communications team. All right, so we are now at the performance monitoring committee items. Mrs. McCulloch?
Hey, I sent somebody a note. Your feed is stuck there. It comes. All right. Hi.
There
it was
she
stuck
is.
on
Okay.
the thank you slide. We had one addition to our consent agenda items. I think it was based in large part on the previous, oh, there it's back again. Thank you. Conversation from the board regarding the buses. So we have added the purchase of 10 buses, of 71 passenger buses and 2 wheelchair buses. And since it's an addition and since there was, there's a little bit of background on what we'll have and what we'll be left with, I asked Mr. Phillips if he'd step up to the mic and just tell you where we're at with our buses, if you're interested.
Good evening. Thank you, Ms. McCulloch. So we'll be purchasing actually 12 buses, 10 regular and 2 accessible buses. We will be trading in 32. Of those 32 buses, 20 of them are from 2008, 11 from 2013, and 1 from 2015. So that will, we're also in this process reducing our fleet from 220 buses to 200 buses, which leaves us 36 on standby, of which some of those buses are distributed throughout the district during our bus routes in case something happens, and they can be routed to the site of an accident or a breakdown.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Does anybody have any questions about how you can get on average $1,900?
Mr. Rollins has a question.
So this isn't actually a question for Mr. Phillips. It's more a question for Mr. Youngblood, and anybody who's been listening to me for years will know what the question is. So this is a $1.3 million expenditure, and we got one bidder, which always makes me very unhappy. So I can see that you sent it to 6 companies. Like, why are we only getting one bidder? There are multiple companies that build school buses.
I expected to. I've reached out to the second bidder I expected a bid from. I have not gotten a response from them. And I will continue until I do to make sure that we get at least 2 or more going forward.
Are we not approving this bid tonight?
We'll buy buses again, but we can't rebid this and get them by June 30th. No, that's why I asked to have it moved up to this meeting, because I was concerned about the extra 2 weeks and actually being able to get them in this budget year if we waited till the 13th.
It would be nice to understand why we're not getting bids from more than one company.
Having not heard from them yet, my understanding is one of 2 things are likely. One, that they couldn't deliver by the 30th because it is a different manufacturer than the one that has been awarded. Or the second one could be the number of trades simply that we had and the size of their used inventory. So I'm hoping to get that response. I expected this question. It wasn't my favorite thing. I was a little disappointed to get 2 as well, but the pricing is in line with what we've been paying in the past. And I feel that the bid process has kept them honest that way. And it has come in well under budget.
All right, thanks.
And you said that it's budgeted for 1.4 million, so we did come in under. My question to you was that we weren't even going to buy any buses, so how is it that it's in the budget? I mean, as of our last meeting, we weren't going to buy buses because Mr. Rollins asked that question.
I can't speak to that. I'll be honest. I don't.
I think I can speak to that. Okay. What we did is that we went back to the drawing board, and this was not a finalized budgetary process. We're in the middle of it still, and we made adjustments to our budget in order to incorporate this investment. I think one of the big changes you'll see here is that by ordering less buses than the 27 we've ordered in many years, we were able to both continue to freshen up the fleet, but decrease the size of the fleet, which adds some operational efficiency. We're still well above the level we need to be. But to answer your direct question, Mrs. McCulloch, we added money into the budget and took it away from some other areas because the budget is a very fluid document at this stage still.
Could I add one thing? This is Michelle Yar to that. Good evening. This was our advanced spend. So we flipped this to an advanced spend to relieve the 22 budget. So we're projecting to have a $1.9 million increase for fiscal year 20 or 21, which is why we had those funds available to do an advanced spend to get buses in based on our last conversation. So just give more clarity for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and they did ask to put this on the agenda ahead of where it would fall based on the process, just because there is a timeline to get it in under this year's budget, right? So that's our only addition from the consent agenda items, and I don't have anything else to report.
Okay. Mr. Rollins, the Planning and Development Committee report.
Sure. I did have one other comment on buses. So for the younger, or I shouldn't say younger, for the newer school board members, although I'm in the older category, so I can say younger. For the newer school board members, I learned as part of this process years ago that the state of Illinois reimburses us for 70% of the cost of these buses, but they do it after the fact, and they do it in a multi-year process. But it's one of the reasons why I push the administration to continue to fund its refreshment program, because every time we don't buy buses, we're going to be losing that reimbursement from the state of Illinois going forward, and it will actually reduce our revenue from the state of Illinois then going forward. So we only really, at the end of the day, we only pay 30% of this cost. It's just the problem. It's a cash flow problem. It's really the problem. For my committee, we did not have, I don't believe we had anything for this. Yeah, there's nothing on here.
Tim, Ms. Yar wants to respond to your.
Okay.
Ms. Yar.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this reimbursement gets a little bit tricky with the buses. So what we're able to do is we do get reimbursement, so that is correct, but it takes us 5 years, because what we're able to claim is depreciation. So there's a 5-year depreciation for those accountants out there, but it takes us 5 years to get that money as a reimbursement for buses. So we do get the money, it just takes us a few years to get it.
Right. So we do have to front the cash. but then we get reimbursed over a multi-year period.
Yeah, it's just not the next year, but it is over time.
Right.
You know, Tim, for us old members who remember the propane discussion, I don't remember what years we bought those propane buses. When will it take us to get out from under those, Mr. Phillips? Do you know?
I will have to talk with Mike Schleifing and get back to you with that question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So
It was the latest, greatest at the time, but.
Yes, so I actually, as long as we're talking about buses, I asked Mr. Schleif when he did his budget presentation to me as part of our preparation for the committee of the whole, how those are working out. And so again, for the newer school board members, we not only bought a series of propane buses, but we also put it in a propane refueling station out at the transportation center. And the first year that we had those propane buses, they were pretty problematic. And what we were told at the time was that the technology was new. They didn't really have the technicians who were trained. So they did not work out very well for us in the beginning, but at least Mr. Schleif told me that things seem to be going better now. And so I think he views them as more of a wash. I mean, I didn't get the sense he saw a strong reason to push for propane, but it's not really a strong reason to get out from under them at this point either.
I would agree. In talking with Mike, our mechanics are better versed at working on these as we experience issues. And I believe parts aren't that much different than replacement parts on a regular bus. So, but I think talking with Mike, it was the lack of knowledge from our mechanics when these were originally purchased.
Okay, so the planning and development has no follow-up on items for this board meeting.
okay. For the governance committee, I have no additional report on any items, so we'll move on to the consent items. Under number 9, there's a long list there. Payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, construction pay request log, the financial results for February 2021, the monthly cash and investment report for February 2021, bids for interior renovations at Rolling Green and Bayer, interior renovations at Lincoln and Summerdale, administration building first floor renovations, the wellness program administrator, which Mrs. Yar sent us an email about that, the Jefferson High School track renovations, the E-rate 2021 infrastructure, the West Middle School asbestos abatement project, and the school buses, and the consent items including meeting minutes from March 9th, contract purchase orders, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration?
Can I point of order on this?
Sure.
Did you mention Ellis and I just missed it?
I don't think I did.
But he did mention the bid itself.
Okay.
Oh, he did, okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't hear the Ellis
You're
bid, so I want
right.
to make
Yeah,
sure that
you're
it was
correct.
in the, because it's in the list.
I jumped ahead. So there are renovations at Ellis and Risa. Okay, Mr. Rollins?
9K.
9K, okay. Any others that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Okay, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the items and consent items not pulled.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now I'll take a motion and a second to approve item 9K, which is the Wellness Program Administrator.
So moved.
So, second.
Okay, I'm not sure. Was that Mr. Rollins?
Yep.
Okay, all right. And Mr. Connor second, all right. All right, questions, comments, or discussion, Mr. Rollins?
So the only reason I pulled this is because on paper, it looks like we are awarding to the highest proposer. This is not a bid, it's a proposal. We're not legally required to submit to the lowest responsible bidder. But I think I would like something on the record saying why we're awarding to what appears to be the highest priced company.
Okay, Mr. Zediker or Ms. Yar?
Ms. Yar.
I'll let Mr. Zediker speak to this. This is really a program decision. We are not required to go with the lowest bid, as Mr. Rollins had stated. So I'll have Mr. Zediker speak to that from a program standpoint.
Yeah, so some of the reasonings behind the selection of Empower Health as our wellness provider, as we looked at the program as a whole, we looked historically at the last 5 years, over the last 5 years, and the most success we had in terms of employee satisfaction, usability, reports, information, as we looked at who was participating, was with Interactive Health. And as the board remembers, Interactive Health was one we selected a little over a year and a half ago to bring back for some of those reasons. As they filed for bankruptcy and went out of business, we selected Empower Health to continue that service. Empower Health has provided excellent customer service. We've had biometric screenings this year that in my world, when you don't get emails or complaints about how the services are being provided, that means we're doing a really, really nice job. Empower Health uses their own employees for the blood draw. In years past, what we would get from our employees are a lot of complaints of unprofessionalism, lack of flexibility with some of the subcontractors that were utilized within the other administrators that we've used in the past. Even so, to the point where we had to cancel our previous wellness administrator a year early for their contract because of some of those issues. Also, with the ability for the labs that Empower Health utilizes, those are located right here in Rockford, and so that's always been an option for our employees if they didn't want to use the school site, was to be able to use an off-site lab. There is a chance with the other providers that they would have to travel to Crystal Lake, depending on which lab that they end up contracting with. Empower Health can perform the 36 chem that we utilize for our blood draw and have. The other vendors, Active Health, would be able to provide it with an a la carte type of an approach, which increases their cost. And then the Telegen provider didn't really explain much in terms of how they would perform that 36 chem. So as we looked at some of those variables, along with the incumbent who is providing great customer service, the reports that they give to our employees, and they do provide a second screening for employees who may be at risk. And so as we looked at all of those variables, this is why we're making an administration recommendation to go with Empower Health.
Comments or questions for Mr. Zediker? Ms. Pearson.
Yeah, I just have a question in regards to Empower. Did you ever offer any feedback to them regarding their lack of professionalism?
Yeah, it wasn't Empower Health that had their lack of professionalism. It was our previous provider that we utilized a couple of years ago, Virgin Pulse, and we certainly did provide that, and we did not come to a resolution which led us to cancel the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for the clarity.
Any reference checking on Empower by any of their current customers?
We did that last year when we looked to add them as our administrator last year. So if you remember, I did bring this to the board as we selected those. Right. Michael Parsons from Williams Manny has worked with Empower and other organizations and districts, and they came recommended last year to fill that role.
It's interesting that none of the healthcare systems in Rockford are providing that service anymore, so it must not be profitable. Mr. Connor.
Yeah, since you brought that up, one of the things I'm going to say is, yeah, that it's very obvious that the health systems are not into this, and that these, I don't know, one of the things I was going to ask, and I guess I could have looked it up, how big are these actual organizations? What, 100 people, 1,000 people?
Off the top of my head, I do not have the answer. I don't know that I have. I do have Michael Parsons here who helps with that process, if he may be able to answer that.
So all of the organizations we looked at on headcount, I can't really tell you, except that Active Health is a part of Aetna, so they are
Okay, they're the biggest.
significantly sized. Telegen tends a little bit more they tend to work with many, many thousands of people. But I believe when we looked at it, they were 200 to 400. And then I honestly, on Empower, I think they were a couple hundred. Empower has been, all of them have been in business in excess of 10 years.
Yeah.
And have
So they don't have a corporate parent or anything like that?
No, Empower does not. It is
Okay.
privately held.
So, and one of the things, it looks to my eye, and I'm not really, trained in this particularly, but it looks like that 36 panel testing is more, if you will, integrated. It's more of a whole. That's really one of its advantages, because if you look at Active, it's not just the cost. It looks like it's frankly a clunkier process, and that would equate to lower customer service.
Yeah, and our employees have been used to that 36 cam that we've utilized for the last several years.
So then the other thing is, and Michael, as long as you're here, is there any study on kind of the relationships, when we see the results of this, with our claims or anything like that? That was the one thing I couldn't picture when I saw this is, what results are we seeing? Because I thought, again, as a general theme, our claims, even though they went up, as you pointed out, over this last year, it seems like our claims experience is actually pretty good. So it seems like this has been a pretty successful program.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't call any causality just from the wellness program, but we certainly think that the wellness program we've had with employees tracking their own health, getting those results from that 36 chem, working with their doctors, we think that plays a vital role in the success we've had over the last 5 years in terms of mitigating huge increases for healthcare.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you. I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 9K, I think it was.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll now move on to closed session consent items, including the appointment of Sean Norton as a 10-month high school assistant principal at Guilford High School, the appointment of Ebony Wren as an 11-month principal at Nashhold Early Childhood, the HR organizational report and addendum, and the closed session consent items for student discipline. Unless otherwise modified below, the board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Students 4374 and 4375 are expelled for the remainder of this school year, the entire 21-22 school year, and through the first semester of the 22-23 school year. Student 2051, the expulsion is held in abeyance contingent upon an EIA agreement for the remainder of this school year through the second trimester of next school year, the 21-22 school year, and that the following students are receiving EIAs: student 1070, 8210, and 8214. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Are there any closed session consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of closed session consent items.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, our next item is follow-up for board member action steps or administration. I didn't have any. Does anybody have one that I might have missed? Okay. Is there any other business for the board tonight? Not, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye. Opposed,
Aye.
same sign. We are adjourned at 7:49. Thank you for the new microphones.